Welcome back to session 3 of Reset. You know, you may have heard the story of the man who's walking along the beach and he sees a bottle there and he picks it up and somewhat optimistically, but not figuring it's going to happen, he uncorks the bottle and sure enough, just like in the story, a genie comes flying out of the bottle and the man jumps into action and he says, 3 wishes, right? And the genie goes, no, actually, I don't know if you're aware of inflation and just budgets are all out of whack. You get 1 wish. The guy thinks for a minute and he goes, you know what? Our 25th anniversary is coming up. I would love to take my wife to Hawaii for our 25th anniversary. The genie goes, no problem. I'll get you first class tickets. I'll get you great accommodations. The man goes, whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, I'm not done with my wish yet. My wife is scared to death of flying. There's no way she's going to fly halfway across the Pacific Ocean and hope they find an island to land on. And the genie says, no problem. There's cruises that go there. And the guy goes, actually, one of my ancestors perished in the Titanic. I'm not big on ocean cruises. My wish is for you to build a road from California all the way to Kona, Hawaii. And the genie just shakes his head. He goes, that's absolutely impossible. You're going to have to choose something else. Do you have any idea what that would cost? I mean, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of miles. You know what that would do? That would just disrupt the ecology of the ocean, the migratory patterns of animals. There's no way. You've got to pick something else. And the guy says, first, I dropped from 3 wishes to 1, and now you won't even grant that. And he thinks for a minute. He goes, well, it is our anniversary. He goes, I'll tell you what. He goes, just give me the ability to understand my wife. I just want to know why she thinks what she thinks. I just want to understand how her mind works. At which point, the genie looks down, looks back up at the man and says, that road, you want 2 lanes or 4 lanes? Now, if you're searching in your Bible, you're not going to find that there. That's a humorous introduction to what for me is, without question, the most personal session of all the 6 we're going to look at. There's no other passage that has impacted me more or taught me more about how to love Ellen well. But that growth came from a very difficult season in our lives. And we'll see if I can get through this lesson without crying. I'd say it's about even odds on that. We're going to be looking at the story of Hannah as recorded in the book of 1 Samuel. This story is full of pain, but also full of hope. And watch as we go through here. Look for signs that just about everyone in this story changes for the better. And if the men and women in this story can change, then you know what? So can I, so can you, so can those who are close to you. In verse 1 of 1 Samuel 1, we read, there was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Continue read in verse 3. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Hannah suffered from infertility. And just saying that word causes me to flash back to our 5-year struggle with infertility. It was such a hard time for us as month after month of disappointment became year after year of just absolute heartbreak. We had a couple miscarriages in there. We were working toward an adoption, and the adoption agency shuttered its doors and went out of business. I mean, it just seemed like God was never going to answer these prayers. That was a long, long time ago, and God eventually blessed us with 2 amazing kids after my wife Ellen went through 3 surgeries. But it is still, without a doubt, the most painful season in our marriage so far. We were in our first church. I mean, the church was a small country church, but in the middle of a baby boom. There were 12 babies born to this church of 120 people in 1 year. And my wife, as a pastor's wife, was kind of the de facto hostess of a lot of these baby showers. Mother's Day was the worst day of the year for her. And we never told anybody in the church about this struggle. And so people said some remarkably hurtful, but just uninformed, silly things. I remember somebody saying to me, "Pastor, you ought to drink out of that water fountain over there. Last 3 pastors drank from that fountain, and what do they have, Millie, like 8 kids between them?" I didn't know it was the fountain of life. They just didn't know because I kept it all private. The story continues of Hannah. And maybe you've experienced similar to this. Maybe some of you are in the middle of this right now, or I can almost guarantee there's somebody close to you that either has been or is right now or is going to go through this struggle. Verse 6 says, "Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival," that's Peninnah, the other wife, "kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat." Peninnah intentionally provokes Hannah. Thankfully, at least we didn't have that to deal with as we were struggling through this. But this rivalry, I mean, God's original plan was not multiple wives. Sister wives, it's just a bad idea. But again, that's what the culture did. God is not sanctioning it or approving it. He just writes this book to real people who live in real life situations. Let's keep going with the story. Verse 8, her husband Elkanah would say to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" Elkanah loves and tries to comfort Hannah, but struggles to understand her grief. He just flat out asks her the wrong question. "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" Unfortunately, I made that same mistake. I mean, in an attempt to encourage Ellen, I would sometimes say things like, "Am I not enough for you? It's okay if we never have kids." And I can still remember one day, and probably she had to say it more than once, she just said, "You're never going to understand. It's different for you than it is for me. Yes, you love me well, but we're talking about a different chamber of my heart that you were just never designed to fill." I wish I could say that was my only mistake, but it wasn't. I also bought into the lie that pastors should be burden bearers, not burden sharers. I'd like cross-stitched that and hung it on the wall of my brain. Doesn't that sound good? Probably it's in Proverbs or something. It's not. God never said that. People came up with that. But I thought, as pastor, as leader, I need to be strong. I don't need to dump, my issues on people. I've come here to serve and to build them up. What a just terrible perspective that was. Verse 9, we continue the story. "Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow saying, 'Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son. Then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." It's obvious from her words that Hannah is devout and vows to give her son to God's service. What a commitment. Verse 12, as she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and he said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine." Eli the priest mistakes Hannah's prayer for drunkenness, and he rebukes her strongly. You know, this makes me wonder, was passionate prayer just that out of the ordinary that Eli didn't recognize it? Or was Eli just that clueless? James 1:19, recently when I taught this, a guy came up to me after the session and he said, kind of like James 1:19, huh? And he quoted it, and he said, "Let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And I kind of cocked my head a little bit, and he goes, "Hey, Eli went 0 for 3. He missed on all 3 of those, as sometimes have I, and probably have you." Let's keep going with verse 15. Hannah pushes back. She goes, "Not so, my Lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I've been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." She said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. God changes Eli's mind about Hannah, and he blesses her. This gives Hannah hope. Not only did Eli change in this story, but the effect on Hannah is immediate. Now she's able to eat again. She's no longer downcast. This is the power that happens when somebody actually understands our struggle. She's still not pregnant, but this just lifts her spirit. Verse 19, early the next morning they arose and worshiped before the Lord, and then went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." God answers Hannah's prayer. She names her son Samuel, which means God has heard. Remember that. That's going to be significant later, too. Well, some time passes, and in verse 21, when her husband Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice, so it's at least 1 year has gone by, he goes up to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow. Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, "After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always." "Do what seems best to you," her husband Elkanah told her. "Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word." So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Elkanah could have easily thought, is my wife, is she second-guessing the commitment that she's made? But he trusts her. Elkanah honors Hannah by deferring to her wisdom. This is the same guy who earlier just goes, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" There's been a growth in their relationship. There's been growth in him as her husband. He trusts her. The night before Ellen and I got married, my dad says, "You and I need to sit down and have a talk." And I thought, oh no. Has he saved the birds and the bees for the night before our wedding? Please. I don't know that I can handle this. Thankfully, that was not his topic. But we sat down, just the two of us, and he said, hey, I just want to tell you something. He goes, Ellen will consistently come to the right conclusion, the right decision, using a process that you don't begin to understand. I go, what? And he goes, it's like this. He goes, remember the TV we used to have? It like had rabbit ears. Some of you don't even know. Go to a museum. You can see these if you're younger. It had rabbit ears. On a good night, we got 3 channels. Sometimes we had to take aluminum foil and wrap it around the rabbit's ears. My dad said, most of us guys, on a good day, we receive 3 channels. He said, Ellen, like most women, is wired for cable. If my dad were living now, he'd probably say she's got a satellite dish. She receives channels you don't even know exists. And son, let me tell you something. If you reject her counsel because you can't understand step by step how she got to that conclusion, you will forfeit one of God's greatest sources of wisdom in your life. That, after 43 years of marriage, is without a doubt one of the most helpful things my dad or anybody else ever gave me. And Elkanah seems to be moving on that same path of growth. Verse 24, after he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When the bull had been sacrificed, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, pardon me, my lord. As you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. Hannah fulfills her vow. What an amazing commitment this is. What a major gift this is. How difficult this sacrifice must have been. This turns out to be significant, not just for their family. Yes, God gives them 5 other children, but it's still a great sacrifice on her part and on Elkanah's part. But it turns out to be significant, not just for their family, but for the whole nation of God. You see the background to this, and we won't take the time to look at all these. You can look these up on your own if you want. But Eli's son, we already talked about him earlier, Hophni and Phinehas, they were wicked. They treated God's work with contempt. I don't know who said this. I've tried to find it, and I'm not even sure I'm quoting it right. But someone once said, no hands are so calloused as those who handles God's work and word too frequently and too casually. You know, I've always considered that to be one of the occupational hazards of a life of occupational Christian full-time ministry. It's a warning to me that we can get so comfortable with this, that I can open the scriptures and think, what can I find here to share with this group, or who needs to hear that? That's led to some very dry times in my life when I bypass that critical step and my ministry no longer is the overflow of my own walk with God. Don't fall into that trap. In contrast to Hophni and Phinehas, Samuel is faithful in his service to God. You know, this is great for the nation, but I can't help but wonder about Eli. And this part's not in the Bible. I want to ask Eli someday, did you view this as your second chance? After all the heartache with your own sons, was this a chance to do some things differently with Samuel? You know, what a message of hope this is. We now have 4 grandchildren. And I'll tell you something, though I was trying pretty hard as a father, there are definitely some things I've learned along the way. There's some things I want to repeat, but there's a bunch of things I want to do differently. And what a joy to get a chance to make some of those changes with our grandchildren. Samuel in this story, and it's several chapters moving forward, he consistently listened to God. This is so significant. You know, his name means God has heard, and as Samuel becomes more and more like God, he becomes known as one who listens. He says, I heard the voice of God. Speak, for your servant is listening. That's one of the ways he shows his growth in this story too. All Israel over time recognizes Samuel as a true prophet, a spokesperson for God. And in fact, Samuel ends up being the one who anoints the first two kings that Israel has, Saul and David. This is such an amazing story. The bottom line of this, you've probably already guessed this, God hears and understands his daughters. God hears and understands his daughters better than her husband. Certainly better than the other woman in this story. Better than the religious leader who misinterprets her commitment to the Lord for drunkenness. This is the challenge for us who want to love the women in our lives well. We've got to become better listeners. Years ago, Ellen said to me, again, I'll never forget this. She said, listen to me. For the next 30 minutes, I want you to listen to me with as much focus as you would if I were someone who had made an appointment with you for counseling. Ouch. What was she saying? She's saying, I'm getting the leftovers of your attention. I'm getting the leftovers of your emotional engagement. And she was absolutely right. I don't think she's had to repeat that many times in our marriage because it just stunned me that much. But I've needed regular reminders from her. Don't just hear my words. Listen to my heart. This third session brings us to the end of the first half of this series. We've looked at 3 characters from the Old Testament. Sessions 4 through 6 will look at a woman or sometimes a group of women from the New Testament. But before you go to your discussion time, let's just take a minute and review. What did we learn from Hagar? What was the takeaway there? God sees and values his daughters. That's how he looks at you, ladies. He doesn't love his sons more. They're not of higher value. We're of equal worth to him. And guys, it's so important that the way we treat the females in our lives, that's reflective and we align ourselves to God's love. From the lesson that we talked about with Deborah, God loves strong women. God elevates and empowers his daughters. What a great example Deborah is for both men and women. And I hope your heart beat a little faster as we studied her life together. And then this session, as we looked at Hannah's life, the sting of infertility and God's just sensitive dealing with her. God hears and understands his daughters. So as you begin this time of discussion, women, how does the assurance of God not only hearing, but deeply understanding you help during times of trouble? It may not be infertility. It may be another health crisis. It may be a time of friction in relationship. It may be financial troubles. Whatever it is, how does believing that God not only hears your prayers, even when they're not yet answered, but he deeply understands you. He knows the cry of your heart when you can't even verbalize it. How does that help you through the tough times? And men, why do you sometimes hear the words of the women in your life without trying to understand their emotion and meaning? Why do we content ourselves to just go, yeah, I heard what you said. Do I need to repeat it for you? I heard it. I even almost memorized it. And yet there's not a connection on a heart level. Why do we do that? And what can we do to change it? Those are challenging questions. But we're halfway through this series now. And so the time for playing it safe is long over. Dig in, open your heart and share, because it's very possible that the most important thing you'll learn in this session won't come from me. It will come from someone else in your group, or something God's Spirit whispers in your ear as you're talking amongst yourselves. Go for it.